Hi, I'm Dominic. Thanks for watching Dominic's Woodworks. Recently I used a piece of birch to make the accent pieces or the corners for my birdhouse. And I used my bandsaw for that. While doing so I thought this is a lot like milling my own lumber. And, well, today I'll show you how to turn a piece of this into a rustic, neat little coaster. I start with cutting off a piece of the branch, just freehanding it and then truing up the other side. Freehand as well. Then I put the fence back on my bandsaw and put the piece of branch into my clamps. I try to make sure that it's as stable as I can get it. And at this point, if one of the surfaces is at an angle that doesn't allow that, you should just cut it straight again. The idea is to have the clamp right against the corner made up by table and fence and hold it as steady as possible. After the first slice, cut off a second one of the thickness you want your coaster to be. Then use that to set the fence for the next slice in order to get matching thickness. Repeat that until your log is gone, or until there's not enough left for the clamp to hold securely. You should end up with enough mini boards to make a coaster. If not, you need to take apart a second piece of branch. In order to glue up your mini boards, you need to true up the edges, and I do that by using double-sided tape to put them on a piece of slat. And I align them with the side, and I set the fence so that the blade only cuts through my mini board and takes off the bark. Make sure your slat isn't bowed or bent, because that will result in not right angles and give you a headache for the glue up later. Take some time to arrange your mini boards in order to get the most visually appealing result. And in my case, I didn't use the right slat and the edges turned out slightly skewed, as you can see here. But I managed to remedy that by turning the boards to find a combination that might not be as visually appealing as the one I chose first, but works as far as the angles go. To facilitate the glue up, I'm using two coils that are slightly smaller than the width of my board to be, and I'm covering them in packing tape to keep the glue from sticking to them. I recommend covering them completely from the start and not make a fancy mess like I did by trying to save some packing tape. I'm using waterproof glue just in case someone spills something, and I'm only applying it to one side of each joint, but I put enough so there won't be any glue starving. Next I press them together, put them between the coils and apply the clamps on the coils first to keep them in place, but I don't put too much pressure on them yet. Only after I put the clamps that actually press the boards together, I tighten those on the coils. I hope that makes sense. After I removed the clamps and the coils, I took my little board over to my thickness sander or drum sander jig. I kept on sanding till both sides were glue-free and smooth. In order to cut the square for the coaster, I'm using the bandsaw with the fence set to the desired width of the square. I first run the whole thing through on one side to get parallel edges. Then I'm using my miter gauge to true up a side perpendicular to those, and again use the fence, which I didn't move, to complete the square. Now it's time to select the cutoffs that are most visually appealing for the edge trim. I'm using my hand miter saw to cut the miters on the trim because it's a little easier on those than the bandsaw, and I'm using a pencil to mark where I need to cut. I also mark the pieces I cut and the coaster to keep them aligned, just in case my square isn't actually that square. Wherever the bark peeled off while using the miter saw, I glue it back in place using CA glue. Try not to produce a piece of modern art by gluing yourself to it. I'm sticking with CA glue both because it's quick and also because I didn't think of the possibility of using tape to clamp this when using normal wood glue. Either way, make sure you keep the pieces aligned if you have marked them, and once again, make sure to keep the piece removable from your skin. I'm using the drum sander to go over the edges and trim the trim flush with the board. To cover up a few small gaps, I apply glue to them and go over it with sandpaper in the hopes that the dust from the sanding will fill those gaps. For good measure, I also give it a once over with a random orbital sander. And finally a few coats of lacquer, acrylic based in my case, just to make it a little less likely to have the piece be stained while in use. This one has one coat of lacquer on it. You could probably add a few more coats, but I think it'll work fine like this. So, since it's a skill builder, what did I learn from this? I found it actually pretty easy to produce semi-good quality cuts with a bandsaw and a clamp, like I showed you, and the wobbling doesn't really account for much unevenness, and what little it causes is quickly sanded away. And I was actually surprised how easy it is to turn a round log into a little board. And while my bandsaw isn't really on the big side, I think with more pieces like this, or with a thicker piece of log, it would actually be pretty easy to make your own boards for boxes or something like that. Having made the lumber or the board myself is a pretty huge part of the appeal of this project. Thanks for watching, and you probably noticed that I published this video in English and in German. It's kind of an experiment and we'll see how it goes. So, thanks for watching and remember to be inspired. Putting this up would have made a great time-lapse effect video, but I just don't have time for that. I expected this glue up to be rather tedious, but it turned out to be pretty simple.